So we're here with Nancy Forrest. We're very honored to be with you today, Nancy. And my name is Brother Phap, Brother Stream, and I'm here with Jasdeep Kaur, and we are we're having we're very grateful this morning to have this chance to. Well, I know it's afternoon in Europe.
Well, it's almost dinner time. Yeah.
To have this chance to have an interview with Nancy Forrest, Jim Forrest's wife, or who worked quite a bit with Thay in the 60s and 70s, and we've
Well,
all been so
yeah,
grateful.
I'll tell you about that. Actually, I didn't. So
Yeah, I know.
that's a part of the story I'll tell you about.
Yeah. So maybe Nancy, you'd like to introduce yourself first?
Well, I'm living in Alkmaar, which is a small town, not very small actually, northwest of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Um, I've been living here for 42 years, since 1982. And I came here to marry Jim. So that was my reason for coming. I work as a literary translator. I translate fiction and nonfiction books from Dutch to English and children's books. We have a very large family. Most of our children are here. We have 6 children in our combined family. 5 of them are here in the Netherlands, and 1 is still in the US. I come from New Jersey. That's where I was born and raised. So 10 grandchildren, big family. Also very, very combined, sort of typical modern American family where you've got, children from different previous marriages all combined. So here we are.
Wonderful. So we came up with some questions, which I think you've seen.
Right, I printed them out so I could check them as we go through them.
Great. So I'll start off. I think Jasdeep and I will just alternate and maybe come up with some more questions as
Okay.
learn more. So first of all, I wanted to ask if you could tell us about kind of your root spiritual tradition, if you have any in your family, or before meeting Jim or Thay or any of those. Do you have any? Did you follow
Well,
spiritual path at all in your family?
yes, very strong. My grandparents were Dutch immigrants, actually, from the Netherlands. So I grew up in New Jersey in the Dutch Reformed Church tradition, which is a Calvinist tradition. You know, church twice on Sunday and lots of very, very involved in church life. I
Okay.
went to a college in Michigan, which was affiliated with the Dutch Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan. We were all, Dutch American kids. It was sort of interesting that I ended up coming to the Netherlands because this is where my roots are, actually. But I was not happy with Calvinism. I don't know how much you know about it, but I found it very, very narrow. And I was sort of on a spiritual journey. And I went, as many people do who go on spiritual journeys, you sort of jump, you sort of leapfrog from one tradition to another until you finally get to where you're happy. So I went to the Episcopal Church. I became a Catholic for a little while. And then when I met Jim, who was also Catholic, he was very much involved in the Catholic peace movement in America during the Vietnam War. I guess you've read all about that. And that's when his relationship with Thay was formed, when he had that connection. So we met each other when we were both working at the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which is a religious peace organization, quite old actually, and it was in Nyack, New York, which is just north of New York City. This was in 1974. Jim was married to somebody else, I was married to somebody else, and our two families became very close. We became good friends. And it was also, I think, because we were both searching. We had in common a religious quest that we talked about all the time. And the friendship finally developed into a marriage when his wife left him and my marriage fell apart. And we had so much in common because we were both really pilgrims. So Jim had he was doing a lot of work in Russia at the time in the Soviet Union. He was very interested in religious life under the persecution, Soviet persecution. So he spent a lot of time there. He traveled a lot. He was a guest of the Russian Orthodox Church in the Soviet Union at that time, which was there was much more going on than he actually anticipated. There was a lot of persecution, there's no doubt about it, but what he found was very exciting and had had enormous spiritual depths that he didn't know about. And we were married at the time when this was all happening. So because of the connection he made with this little Russian Orthodox church in Amsterdam, he got in touch with the priest there, and who helped him to make contacts in the Soviet Union, but also invited us to come just to see what the church in Amsterdam was like. And we went. It was really funny. It was, we were still Catholics at the time, and we thought, well, we'll give it a try. We'll see what it's like. We thought it would just be Russians, but we got there and discovered that it was mostly Dutch people because the Russians couldn't travel. And it was wonderful. It was a very tiny church, and it was in a little corner of a big Catholic church in Amsterdam, maybe 15 people every Sunday. It was very small. So we fell in love right away. It was love at first sight, and we became Orthodox that year. That was in 1988. And here we are. I'm still very active. I'm one of the oldest members now in that parish. The parish has moved twice since then because it's interesting. There are so many Christian churches in the West, and especially in the Netherlands, that are closing because nobody goes to church anymore. It's become so secularized, except for the Orthodox. So our church continues to grow. More and more people come, and we have to buy new churches because we sort of outgrow the building that we're in. And now we're in a rather large church in a lovely part of Amsterdam, with new people coming all the time. And since the invasion of Ukraine, in 2 years ago, more and more Ukrainian refugees are coming. Because that's another thing. Our church left the Russian Orthodox Church because we were so unhappy with the political connection between the Russian Patriarchate and Moscow. So we left and we joined another patriarchate, which is called the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul. And that's where we are now. So the Ukrainians feel safe because they know we're not Russian anymore. And Jim was very, very active in the Russian. He started a group called the Orthodox Peace Fellowship, which isn't, it was really Jim's project. And when And when he wasn't able to carry it on anymore, it sort of became, well, it just sort of closed down. So we're at a point now where we have to see where we're going next with it. So that's my story. That's my background and my spiritual tradition.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
It sounds close to Father Steve Headley.
Oh my goodness! Do you know Stephen Headley?
Yeah, we interviewed him.
Did you?
Yeah, he because he's an Orthodox priest now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow, he's an old friend, a very good friend.
Could you?
Do you know?
Actually, I was gonna ask if, because he did mention that he was connected with Jim. I mean,
yeah.
Because we did an interview with Steve as well, and so we'd be happy to share that with you. But maybe, is that okay, Jesse? We go.
Yeah.
Describe the connection with Stephen Headley, because Steve was Thay's roommate at Columbia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where Jim. Funny story. Jim sort of became much closer to Thay through Stephen Headley when Father Stephen was at Columbia.
Okay.
But Jim, Father Stephen wasn't Orthodox at that time, and Jim wasn't either, and they lost contact with each other. And it wasn't until we were both here, many years later, when Jim sort of, I can't remember how it happened, but he heard that Father Stephen Headley was the priest of the church in Vézelay. And he said, oh, I know him from a long time ago. And that was the connection with Thich Nhat Hanh. So we began visiting, and we would go down every summer and spend time with Father Stephen and his wife. And
wow,
we just became really good friends. We took our daughter there. We had some great summer vacations there in Vézelay. It's a lovely little French city with a beautiful basilica. It's really amazing. I saw him again. The last time I saw him was just after Jim died. Jim died in January, and I went down I think it was in August of 2022, because he invited me to come down. His wife, Anne, died about 12 years ago, I think, and he's still he's still grieving. It's, grieving is something it becomes your life, really. It's what you, it's tough. It's tough. So he knew that Jim had died, and he invited me to come to Vézelay. So I saw him then. That was 2 years ago. Yeah, I'm so glad you got in touch with him and you were able to interview him. That's great.
Oh, we're so happy, because to have I mean, the way I look at it, Steve was kind of the first American that Thay got to know really well, the first Westerner, because Thay came, he was at Princeton for a year.
Yeah.
But he was on his own and in classes with, students. And we did find a wonderful article that Thay wrote for the Princeton Seminarian describing his view of American culture, like what things that difference between Vietnam and Princeton. But it was actually that next year that Thay actually moved in with an American, Steve. And so, he was asking Steve all kinds of questions. They were sharing an apartment. And so it's just, and of course, Thay wrote about Steve in his book, Fragrant Palm Leaves. I don't know if you've read that book, but
I'm not sure I have it. I'll have to check.
Yeah, and so in our community, Steve is kind of legendary in a way. because Thay talks about it so much, and in fact, Thay wanted to invite him to Vietnam and help with the community they had there, but then they realized having an American in Vietnam would not work at that time.
Probably not.
So,
Not for them.
so Steve actually didn't ever end up going to Vietnam, though he did study Vietnamese.
Well, he works a lot. He's an anthropologist, and he works a lot in Indonesia.
Java, yeah, right. He ended up going
Yeah.
to Java, he told us instead, and doing, but it was just actually, I think when we were working on when the group in our community was working on Thay's biography, that I actually for the first time saw his last name.
Yeah.
And I just did a search online, and then I found the papers that he'd written as an anthropologist, and then I was able to track him down and he's down in this town in France. We were so surprised that he was in France.
Yeah.
He lived most of his life in France.
Yes. He was in Paris first. I think he taught at the Sorbonne for a while.
Yeah, right. Actually, he overlapped with Thay when Thay was at the Sorbonne in the early 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it was just and he did mention in the interview that he's surprised to meet that Jim became Orthodox as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing how life works.
Yeah. Maybe Jazzy has a question.
What, if any, was your connection to Thich Nhat Hanh up to the time you met Jim Forrest?
I didn't have any connection at all. Jim and I were working at, as I said, at this office of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And Jim was married to a woman named Laura Hassler, whose father, Al Hassler, was the general secretary of that organization. So Al was the one who actually brought Thay from Vietnam to the United States. He had made the connection, and so that's how Jim got to know Thay, through Al Hassler. And Laura worked very closely with the School of Youth for Social Services, which was Thay's sort of a social organization that he was involved in at that time. And she was a volunteer, and she was sort of, she's a real organizer. She's an amazing, she's my friend. She lives here in Alkmaar still. And, you know,
she just wrote me yesterday. So she's
really
probably going to come out to Deer Park in November.
so is she? Okay.
Interview her in person. Yeah, I've met her. She was in Plum Village in the early 10s, so I did meet her before.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, she and Jim met through Thay, because Jim was. I don't know the details of this story. This was back in the early 70s, but she was there working with Thay and Fung, and they were putting together this organization and publishing. I think the first book they wanted to publish was The Miracle of Mindfulness, and Jim helped him. Jim is an editor, a journalist, and he knows a lot about that sort of, the book world, and he helped him get that published. So Jim and Laura met through Thay, and that's a very interesting connection too. It's very funny. So what was the question? It was, yeah, my connection. Jim told me about him. I knew about him, but I had never met him, and I had no connection at all. It was really Laura who was, who had a, was very close to both Thay and Fung, and together. Jasdeep, I sent you all those tapes of conversations with Jim and Laura and Thay. That was I think in 1972.
Yeah.
Such a treasure. Thank you so much for.
I can't believe the things I'm finding. It's really archaeology.
You know how meaningful it is for us to hear Thay at that time. That time Thay was very private, not kind of private, but not well known, and so to hear the audio is just. I mean, The Rafts Is Not the Shore is one of my favorite books, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Jim to edit that beautiful book. And
Yeah.
here the and I was determined about 5 years ago when I read it. I read a little bit, but when Thay was teaching, it wasn't so important to me. But then after Thay had a stroke, I picked up that book again, and it's just such a radical, incredibly powerful book.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I was determined to find out where those tapes are. I said those tapes have to be somewhere.
Where are the tapes?
And then, and then I tried to, I couldn't find, I tried Orbis, nobody seemed to have it, but then it was
Yeah.
really thanks to
And then
Jasdeep.
Robert at Orbis got in touch with me.
Right. Well, Jasdeep reached out to
That was,
him, and so
yeah,
that made the connection. So
yeah.
thank you for because
I
it's
couldn't
such a
believe
gift.
it.
Yeah.
I, I had no idea. I had no idea. I didn't know anything about these tapes. But I just started poking around through a particular cabinet um, where there were just hundreds of audio tapes that I knew nothing about. And Jim never talked about them. He just sort of tucked them away, you know. And there they were. There they were. So we were able to get them digitized, and that was, I'm very, very glad that worked out. Who knows what else there is? I'm sure there's a lot more.
You find more, you know where to send it.
I know. I'll let you know. It's funny.
So we had a question. We had read your story of meeting Thay for the first time when Jim, he came up. I mean, Jim recounts it. I'd be curious. I mean, if you'd be willing to tell the story.
Well, I came here in April of 1982 with my daughter from my first marriage, who was 5 years old at the time. And so she was living here with us in this house. And we bought her a bicycle because Dutch children have to learn to ride a bike, and they have to do it early because they have to ride their bikes to school. And, you know, it's like they have to learn to swim. Riding a bike and learning to swim, you have to learn to do these things. It's just part of being a child, a Dutch child. And so we bought her a bike, and there's a parking lot in the back of our house where she had the bike, and she was trying on her own to learn to ride it by riding around this little parking lot. Anyway, I knew that Thich Nhat Hanh was coming that day, and that he was going to give a retreat to the staff of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And Jim was the general secretary at that time. That was why he had come to Alkmaar, because the international office was here in Alkmaar. And so that's where he ended up living. So instead of having it at the office, they decided to have it here at our house, which, you know, I mean, I had heard about this person, but he was like, he was so, he had grown so much in my mind, you know, that I had no idea what to expect, but I was terrified. So the staff came over, and by then, let's see, this was only a month after I had come here. And I knew the people on staff, and they were all young volunteers, and they were fun people. Most of them were Americans. They were, you know, they'd come over for dinner, and we'd have a great old time. Everybody's laughing and drinking wine. Everybody's having fun. And so they all came over to the house. And then Thay and Phung came over, and there he is in his brown robe, you know, and he walks into the house, and suddenly just his presence changed the atmosphere in the living room. And all of these young volunteers who I had known a short time, but I had, you know, enjoyed their company very much, and we were very relaxed. And suddenly they stopped talking. They developed this kind of reverential attitude that I found so odd. And it was like the Pope had come into the house, you know, it was so weird. And so everybody sat down, and he sat down, and they were like, you know, just, I didn't know what to make of it all. It was just too strange. And in the meantime, my daughter, who's in the parking lot, she comes running in saying, I think I've almost got it, I think I can almost do it. And it was a beautiful day. It was warm weather. So she's back and forth running in the back door with news about riding her bicycle. And so she runs into the living room, and there is this, sort of very strange silence. And Thay is talking, and I don't even remember what he said. Really, I couldn't tell you. And but finally, I had to make a decision. It was either my daughter or this retreat, and I said, okay, I've got to decide for my daughter. So I left. I went into the kitchen, and the kitchen is between the living room and the back of the house in the parking lot. So I just went in there and I shut the door and I said, I'm out of here, like, and so in the meantime, it was Caitlin, my daughter, was, I went back and I was watching her learn how to ride her bike, and it was really fun and it was lively and real. And then I went back into the living room and it was not real. And Jim, finally it was over. And Jim came up to me and said quietly, I've invited Thay and Fung for dinner. Now, I had only been here for a month, and I was getting to know Jim on a whole different level. And one thing I found out is that he was always doing this. He would always invite people for dinner, like on the spur of the moment, and I had to kind of figure out how to deal with this. So I said, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" And we had enough food, so I just went into the kitchen and I started chopping vegetables. And I think Thay, he had he had a way of understanding people that was remarkable, because he knew that I was uncomfortable, and he knew that I needed to be with my daughter. And he came into the kitchen, and he was just a different person. He was no longer the Zen master. He was just this lovely person and a friend of Jim's. And he started helping me prepare dinner. And he said, do you know how to make rice balls? And I said, no. And he showed me how to make rice balls, and we made this great meal, and it was fun, and we were laughing. And he was just this normal guy, and we had a really nice meal. So that was I say in the book, I think Jim writes that was my first Zen lesson. Really, it was reality. It was the real thing. And it was I'll never forget that day. That was a beautiful day.
Mm. Thay used to, there were moments we would be working with Thay, doing something that came up in the community at Thay's Hermitage, and then he would just order us to go sit at the table, and he would cook for us.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of scrambled tofu, you add cumin and other things to tofu, and it looks like scrambled eggs.
Oh, yeah.
And we would be mortified. We think, no, we would always want to get up and help Thay. And I said, no, Thay will, and then Thay would actually serve us. And we are Thay students. But what your story reminds me of those moments.
It also reminds me of a very funny story. I've only been to Plum Village once, and that was a couple of years later. I think it was in 1984. And so it still was rather underdeveloped. It was quite small, and there weren't that many people there, but there was a small group of American Buddhists who were visiting, and we got to know them. And there was a little tiny kitchen. Everything was small and it was still really a farm. It was that original farm that they had bought. So one of the American guys who was there, he wanted to be helpful, and we were all in the kitchen just kind of sitting around talking. So Arnie was his name, and he went over to the stove, and the stove was covered with, nobody ever cleaned it. It was covered with this kind of, every single meal that they had for the past year, was bits of it were still on that stove. Nobody ever cleaned it. So Arnie thought, well, I'm going to do him a favor and I'm going to clean the stove. And so he started scrubbing it and cleaning it. And he thought, this is a real good thing to do. And here I am, and I'm showing my gratitude. So Thay came over to him and he stood next to him for a while and just watched him clean. And then finally he said to him, Arnie, we never do this. That's all he said. We never clean the stove. What are you doing? It's really funny. We never do this. He could really be funny. He had a terrific sense of humor.
It's true. It's true.
I remember reading that particular story in Eyes of Compassion. Arnie Kotler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That's who it was. Yes.
Yeah. I think that was August 1984 from
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that leads into my next question. Jim mentioned how he stopped going to Plum Village so much.
Right.
Please tell us more about that. Were there some shifts that you perceived in Jim's connection to Thay, or Thay's relationship to teaching others?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with the war ending and Thay's the direction of his work and his life and his teaching turned more to Western disciples, I guess you might call them. And Jim was not a disciple. He was a friend. He had worked with Thay on publishing his books, and he traveled with him a lot. And he had a special and a very warm and friendly relationship with Thay. And he writes about it. I found it. There's this, I'm sure you've read this in The Eyes of Compassion. I brought it down. But he writes about this in the end, which is so interesting. And he said, shall I read this out loud? Shall I just?
Sure. Please.
Okay. That summer, which was the summer I was telling you about, that summer stay at Plum Village was our last visit with Thay and his community. More and more people were coming to learn from Thay, and they hoped to obtain face-to-face access to him. However, we noticed that our having one-on-one time with him excited envy from some of those who had not yet had the opportunity for more intimate guidance. By a fortunate providence, it had been my privilege to travel and live with Thay off and on for 16 years when he was hardly known. Nancy had also gotten to know him both in our kitchen, that story, and at Plum Village. We realized we had had our turn. It was a perfect time to let go and create space for others. So that was really what happened. I think Thay came to visit. It was an interesting situation. Thay came to visit several years later and invited Jim to come. He didn't come to Alkmaar, but he invited Jim to come to Amsterdam, where he was staying, and have dinner with him. And Jim went to Amsterdam, and he told me about it. He said it was the most uncomfortable meeting because there were a couple of American Buddhists who were there, who were, I guess Thay had asked them to make sure that the meeting didn't go too long. He did this with Jim too. He said, make sure that I have plenty of time to relax. And so clearly these people had been given the job to make sure that Thay had time to relax and that he wasn't overstimulated, and he was getting older. And so Jim went, but he said it was a very stilted conversation. He couldn't really talk about the good old days anymore, and they had a meal and he came home, and that was the last time. I think Thay was into a whole different thing, He had a work that he wanted to do with these young people, and sure, it was important for him, and he had to do it. as we say, it was a calling,
Yeah.
and Jim understood that he wasn't hurt or anything, but he realized that his time was over. His
Yeah.
time.
I,
So
I just feel so I mean, I didn't have a chance to speak with Jim or talk with him, but his book has meant so much to so many of us. It's such,
really, yeah,
it really brings us that he took notes that I mean, some of the phrases that he recorded Thay is just so beautiful. I just love that kind of off the cuff. And and in fact, that question when we formulated, I was exactly thinking of that passage you just read of Thay, him kind of bowing out and recognizing
yeah,
great fortune to have known Thay, and then seeing that that time had passed.
yeah,
There's a beautiful grace in that somehow. I'm
yes,
very touched by it.
yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
and I think that you're right, that Thay had this vision that through retreats and mindfulness practice, it's not just about teaching Buddhism or mindfulness, but it's actually about transforming the collective consciousness of violence that
yeah,
led to the Vietnam War. I think Thay had this larger
right,
project. And so he saw that by being a teacher and having this teacher-student relationship, he actually was able to do that, to realize this kind
yeah,
of continuation.
right, right. So no, but Jim is always so. I mean, this sort of segues into another one of your questions: is uh, what aspects of Thay's personality and teachings do you feel Jim connected with most, so that they became Jim's own path? In other words, how did he assimilate what he had learned from Thay, in your view? And uh, in the beginning of Miracle of Mindfulness, right in the first chapter, is the story of washing the dishes,
Yeah.
where and Jim is always bringing up that subject of I'm washing the dishes, I'm washing the baby Jesus. This is uh, this learning mindfulness from a Christian perspective. I thought that Thay always had. He was a big soul, and he understood that there was a deep river, a deep connection between Christianity and Buddhism that it was that he understood. So Jim's uh, profound Christianity and Thay's Buddhism met at that level, and Jim got it, and it was, the raft is not the shore. You also get a lot of that when Thay was talking to Dan Berrigan about Christianity and about the Eucharist and things that that connection, I think, uh, was an important and very deep connection for them both. But another thing that, and another wonderful story, and I want to tell you this because it's also on the same page, where he said, I recall an important teaching moment with Thay in 1968, early in our friendship. We were sitting side by side at a conference being held at the headquarters of the Fellowship of Reconciliation in Nyack, New York. Thay reached for a journal in which I was taking notes, put it on his lap, and drew a simple diagram of a blank page, 4 small circles arranged to form the corners of a square. Then he placed a 5th circle in the center. Next to each of the outer circles, he wrote the names of 4 of my principal mentors: Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Dan Berrigan, and Al Hassler. And under the central circle, he inscribed Jim Forrest. Beneath the diagram, Thay wrote, Jim admires all of these people, but he is not any of these people. Jim is only a name. I is only a pronoun. Who is Jim Forrest? And I think for Jim, that was such an important question. When Jim and I were first way before we were married, when we were first working together at the FOR in Nyack, I noticed that Jim's writing style was very much like Dan Berrigan's, because Dan was older. He was a Catholic priest. He was, he was the radical priest, and Jim was so taken by him, and he sort of copied his writing style. So and I would say to him, Jim, you write like Dan Berrigan. You don't write like Jim Forrest. You've got to develop your own style. And he did, finally. He did. But I think that Thay helped him to understand that he didn't have to copy the style or the art of these other people who he admired so much. I was looking yesterday. Let me see if I can find it. I found the page in one of Jim kept journals. There's like a whole upstairs in our bedroom. There's a whole section of a bookshelf. Oh, now I've lost it. Of all his journals. Now I've got to find it. And I went through them yesterday and found this one. And I've got to find it again because I just put the rats. Okay, I need your patience because I've lost it and I know it's here.
Take your time.
Anyway, I found the page. Oh, this is annoying. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I will hold it up and you can see it. You can see, and Thay wrote this.
Ah, okay.
It's Jim's Jim in the middle. Actually, the four names that he gives in his book are different. They're different here.
Oh,
and
okay.
Thay has written, you like the hippies, you are not a hippie. You like monks, you are not a monk. You like Al, you're not Al. You like Young, which is a friend, you are not Young. Forest is only a name, I is only a pronoun. Who are you? So that is here, and that was way back in 1968.
Nancy, I have to say that this course that we're teaching on Thay this fall is actually called "Who is Thich Nhat Hanh?"
Yeah.
So I mean, I can't believe when you said "Who is Jim Forrest?" I thought this is brilliant.
Here, I have to show you some other things too that I found. These are some drawings that Thay made in Jim's. Whoops. Can you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. That's what we wear. Yeah,
okay.
For the monks. Yeah.
Wait a minute. And he writes the hippies should wear these. Oh, that was lovely. And then it was so funny. Oh, this. He writes, your mind should be free from both being and non-being in order for great compassion to be born. And he wrote on both of these pages. Can you see that?
Wow. Yeah, that's great compassion.
Yeah. And then here's something else he wrote, which of course I can't read.
Yeah.
But I just want to show you these things that he wrote in Jim's journals. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
I was so impressed with Jim because where he's talking about the shaping of his identity, probably in that same chapter, he's talking about taking distance from Thay was along the lines of the proverb he had once shocked me with, if you meet the Buddha, kill him.
Yes, yeah.
These few words are not an invitation to murder anyone, but a summons not to make your life an imitation of someone's, even
Right.
if the other person is the Buddha himself or Jesus.
Yes, yes, I just read that recently too. Yes.
I think, I don't know, there's one or two questions left. You're kind of doing it, I think, already, but we had the question, please share with us what you think Jim would want to share with us if he were here now to do so.
It's in the books. It's, I'm sure he'd want to show you these pictures from his journals.
Yeah, right.
And tell you the stories and many more stories. You can have a whole evening sitting with Jim telling Thay stories.
We found his blog. I don't remember how I got it online, maybe 6-7 years ago, and we were already reading the stories from Isaac Compassion.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Before it came out as a book.
Yeah.
I just can't express how grateful we are, and yeah, I just feel grateful. I mean, the story about when he asked Thay about LSD, and then Thay said, "That
Wasn't that great?
that's
That was
fantastic."
that was that was when Thay knew this is the guy. And they traveled all over he said, I want to travel with you. You're really onto something.
And then
And
there's one that I use in a talk, that the story about not being 21 or not being 18.
Oh yeah, at the porn shop.
The porn shop in San Francisco. It's just brilliant. I mean, stories like that. I mean,
you must be 21.
So grateful to Jim, because that's a Zen master. I mean, that's real.
Yeah. Jim, are you 21? And Jim said no. He said, I'm not either. I did. We don't have to go in, he said.
I don't know. Jazdeep, do you have anything more?
It was the last question. How have mindfulness practice and the spiritual path shaped your own life?
That's a very interesting question, because I don't know if it's something that I did intentionally, but when what drew me to orthodoxy, to Christian orthodoxy, was the practice of meditation, which is very strong. It's called Eastern Orthodoxy because there's a lot of Eastern elements in this particular kind of Christianity, and that you don't find in Western Christianity. So there are practices of meditation that Orthodox Christians follow, that I follow, and Jim did too, where you say something called the Jesus Prayer. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's very common among all the millions and millions of Orthodox Christians know this prayer, and it's very simple. It's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And you repeat this prayer over and over and over again as you're in what Thay might call a mindful state. And I think that for me, these kinds of practices are so important, especially now, when you're grieving. Grief is something that you can't even imagine what it's like unless you're there. I had no idea what it was going to be like until it hit me, but these kinds of meditative practices are so important. And I think that, I'm not sure whether it was from Orthodox spiritual masters or from Thay or from both. You know, it's hard to say, but that's for me is the connection. And I'm just so grateful to have met him at all, you know, and to have had the time I had. I remember once when we were, that one and only time that we went to Plum Village, and he, in the evening at dusk, there was a big field. I'm sure now this whole place is unrecognizable, probably filled with beautiful buildings, but it was just an old field. And he would go on a walking meditation around this field. And he invited us to come, and it was a silent meditation, and we just slowly walked in a mindful way around the field and around the field. And my daughter, who was Caitlin, the bicycle girl, you know, she was there and she did it too. And I was so impressed that she was happy to do it. She just loved it there. But as I was walking, I realized that Thay was walking right next to me, and that he had fallen in step with me. So he was walking with me, and he didn't say anything, and I didn't either. And it was the most remarkable experience.
Well, thank you, Nancy, so much for your time. And this is such a warm. We feel the presence of Jim. We feel the presence of Thay talking to you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's I think it's important for me to talk about it, and I'm so glad to meet you both. Yeah, thank you.